requirements of this permit are different than the previous one, but as we go through the permit application process, we're gonna be looking at each of the things that says you shall do and making a determination of whether it's required or whether it's voluntary. And then making a clear list of those so that the township understands these are the statutory things that you're obligated to do. This is the list of voluntary things that you've said that you want to do because you think that they're either good stewardship or in the best interest of the community, and maybe there are other things that you said were voluntary that you didn't want to do. But we want to make sure that the township understands clearly what it is that you're taking on as an obligation, and to try to reduce that obligation as much as we can, because we know that you don't get funding for stormwater activities in the township. You don't have a direct funding source for that.
Right.
And so it's very difficult for the township to take on all this reporting and all these activities that are required by the federal permit.
And it's also important to note at this time that when we renew our memberships with certain community-based groups that provide education regarding stormwater, it's one of the things that we're required to do in order to maintain this permit. So when we say, well, we're gonna continue to be members of the Clinton River Watershed Council. Now, not to say there's anything wrong with the Clinton River Watershed Council, but one of the reasons why we maintain our membership, aside from the fact that they do good work, is because they fulfill some of the requirements that we have regarding public education. They do that for multiple communities. We had a discussion with Mr. Axtell, Mr. Newmer, and myself, and I'm completely content to say publicly that I would much rather spend $6,900 plus the cost that we annually pay or every other year pay Wade Trim to provide the reports, and as well as the time that we spend in the field doing certain things, just spending the time in the field doing the things instead of going through this reporting process. In other words, at the end of a 10-year period, I think this township could accomplish a lot more if we weren't spending it to have the engineer prepare an application just to get a permit to start telling them what we're doing. I think it's a huge waste of money and time.
I agree.
But I think it's important that we understand that while I don't like it, I'm not going to shoot the messenger because it isn't Mr. Newmer's idea. And I think it's important at some point for Mr. Newmer to discuss what happens if we choose not to do this, what the process is. Meaning, this isn't something before us that's an option. This is something that this board might recall in the past when we chose to ignore this requirement. We actually found ourselves in a situation where we were facing fines.
I guess that was gonna be my question. If this is a requirement,
Then we should
then
make
it
the
is. And I guess what's, right, what we don't wanna do is end up with a substantial fine or another legal matter
Right.
confronting
Correct.
us.
Well, I
So
think that
can-
there was some incorrect information. The engineer didn't do it in '03. I believe that Bill Kenny was doing that. And when we got in trouble in '08, I believe it was when we hired Mr. Newmer to do that. At that point, if I remember, there was, you sure?
Yep, because Tony didn't want to pay anybody to do it, so he asked Adam to start doing it. And then Tony just said to heck with the whole thing. And it was a whole nother story.
Oh, I
But
knew there was something. to
maybe
it.
you could address for us, what the requirements are and what our options are relative to doing this or not doing it.
Well, you don't have a whole lot of options, really. The EPA requires the state to implement, the state requires you to have a permit.
So we're either gonna pay the guy at that end of the table or the guy at this end of the table over there,
Yeah.
Right.
one way or the other.
Right.
Yeah, and-
Yeah, and Rob personally, I don't hear him stumping for the business.
Yeah, well, I'd like to say, I'll mirror your comments, you don't hear me stumping for the business either. My personal opinion is that your money would be better spent going out and fixing problems in the community than doing reporting. That's my personal opinion because I think this is a very report-intensive, administrative-intensive program. But that's what the EPA gives us. The EPA gives the rules to the state sends the rules down to us, and we do it or we get fined.
And
It's
and
just
the
one of
fines-
those things that's just sort of been like going on for years that, because this doesn't seem very logical
Yeah.
that we would just do, I mean, are we talking our actual storm sewer stuff that we're gonna do or just the township properties.
Just township properties.
Just township
Not
properties.
like the storm sewer that's in my backyard,
Right,
right? Just,
right.
I get that
The c-
discharge all
The
goes in
county
there.
has a separate
and- and-
permit
The
for
county
their
has a
property.
permit for county storm
Yeah.
sewers, right.
Yeah.
So this is just the storm sewers that are under the township's jurisdiction.
Right, like
So our little-
schools have property, or have
Schools have their own. yeah.
own.
Reporting
Contractors that are large enough have to pull their own. I mean,
Businesses that are large enough have their
Yeah,
own. Yeah.
I mean,
It
this
just sounds like a
it's stupid.
moneymaker
If
for
they took
somebody.
if they took the pot of money that they collect on this and invested it in proper sewage treatment, we would have better water in 10 years than this permit will ever deliver.
Right.
And I'll just add to that, the fines are up to $25,000 per day of noncompliance. So
Well, there you go.
they're,
There you go. Let's make the
it's a
motion.
steep fine.
Now, the reality is, we faced much less than that in fines in
Yes,
a
we did.
prior situation, but I suppose, that was through a negotiated settlement.
Right.
But the point is why do we wanna face any fines when we're done, we still have to do all of it anyways?
Right.
So,
I'll make the motion to authorize Wade Trim to prepare the application for an MS4 general permit with MDEQ at a cost of $6,900.
all right, is there support? Support by Mr. Tominello. Discussion further, board members? Hearing none, we'll open up the floor for public comment.
Jim Senstock, 31698 San Juan. I went through this thing here, and $6,900 essentially represents, let's say this report takes 100 hours to do. That's $69 an hour. What is your fee, Mr. Newman?
What I charge the township?
Yeah,
When I work on general fund work like this, I think it's $138.45 an hour.
okay, so then we gotta do this in 50 hours.
Well, Mr. Senstock, with all respect, I will be doing all the work. There's people in my office who do it at a much lower rate than I
Which at a
than I
much
get.
lower rate.
Yes.
Yes. So let's assume it takes 100 hours, then $69 an hour with all of these other people working on it is a good rate. There's 19 items here described. That means that you're planning on devoting 5 hours to each one of those items. Okay? So let's go back and just look at these. Item number 1 is contact information. That's 10 minutes. Item number 2, preparation of a map showing the jurisdictional boundary of the township. That's 10 minutes. It's available already. Item number 3, outfall and discharge map. And it says here, noting the township will provide the necessary as-built information. Not Mr. Newmer, not Mr. Newmer's people. The township will do it. All he's going to do is include it in the report. Figure out how long that takes. Does it take 5 hours? We understand there are no nested jurisdictions, so there's 0 hours for that. That's number 4. Number 5 involves education response procedures and public participation involvement. That's done by the Clinton River Watershed Council. You just admitted that we've been using their report all along. So what is that? Another hour? Maybe? In regard to the public, number 6, the public education component, we understand the collaboration with the CRWC has resulted in the preparation of the necessary documentation. So it takes another 15 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour to put that in. Preparation of a summary of the current standard operating procedures, that's already done, and this is only for township properties. At first, I didn't get that until I heard him say it, and I went back and read it. So we already have current operating procedures. All you gotta do is take them and hand them to them. We review the township's, number 8, review the township's initial ordinance, discharge ordinance. If we have discharge ordinances that apply to the township, how long does that take to include in this report? And on top of it, it says the proposal does not, if we have any potential amendments, Mr. Newmer or all of his people aren't going to help address that. So that'll be extra cost when it comes up. I can go on and on, since I heard the little beeper go off, I can go on and on here. But the question becomes, what are you getting for $6,900? You're not getting anything. If he was asking $1,000, I'd have kept my mouth shut. If he was asking even $2,000, I'd have kept my mouth shut. But you've got a department individual that makes over $90,000 who's going to be supplying most of this information to Mr. Newmer and his other people. Why? You know what? It's only $6,900. Oh, well, you know, let's just go ahead and spend it. The fact is, you got to start looking at these proposals. I review these kinds of proposals all the time when I was working. And I guarantee you, we wouldn't put up with that kind of proposal. He'd have been bounced out the door right there. Come back when you got something more concrete. It's amazing to me that you guys are up there as our fiduciary responsibility, have a fiduciary responsibility, and you're not doing any of this stuff. And you're not going to anybody to find out. Call me. I'll help you go through this thing. But the fact of the matter is, we're getting raped. And you're proposing right now to go ahead and do that. Shame on you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment and move back to board comment. I think if the board members had any question as to the scope of work, Mr. Newmer, perhaps you might be able to respond to the residents' comments better than we could in terms of the scope of work, the hours of work, so on and so forth. How come you didn't quote us 1,000 or 2,000?
$552 is what I calculated based on Mr. Senstock's estimate.
Okay.
You should be able to do this for $552.
Okay, so I'm 6,400 over. Let me see if I can. account
Your
for that.
environmental engineer should be able to do this for $552.
Let me see if I can account for that. Mr. Vikesh, you've seen the magnitude of the application. It was probably about 25 or 30 pages of documentation we need to go through. We are relying on a lot of the information the township's providing for us in order to put the maps together, the information together that we need. To be quite honest with you, this isn't something I particularly want to do. I think we're probably going to lose money doing this for the township at $6,900, given the magnitude of what the DEQ wants. I will tell you, there's a ton of work here. There are 19 items outlined in our scope that are kind of summaries of what needs to be done. There are 88 specific items that we need to address in the application. We could go through each one of those line item by line item and talk about what kind of effort it's going to take to do it. I will tell you, our experience with putting these together is that it usually takes about twice what we think it's going to take once we get this to the DEQ. And what's going to happen is we're going to put this all together, we're going to give it to the township and say, you know, we're going to try to cut out as much of this optional expenses as we can, and then we're going to sit down with the DEQ and they're going to say, oh, no, you got to do this, and this. And it's going to redouble the amount of work that it takes because we're going to have to do a lot of it over again. So I'm very comfortable in my proposals to the township. I think we're giving you, providing a good service. If the township doesn't see the value in our proposal, I'm really not unhappy at all if you want to do the work yourself. It's thankless work to do, it's difficult, it's tedious.
Understood. That's a fair response. There's a couple of things here. One is simply stated, this is outside of the scope of, I guess for lack of a better word, knowledge base than what we have here. That's number one. We don't have someone that provides this sort of a service. Number two, it makes sense to contract this kind of work because there is a process of education that, say, MDEQ does. So, for example, Mr. Newmer pointed out that these applications haven't, our last application was 2003. The one that came out in 08, basically a number of municipalities said to the MDEQ, you're asking us too much information. MDEQ said, no, we're not, right, EPA? And EPA said, yeah, you're not following our rules. So MDEQ was stuck. So because of that, they were kind of in between. MDEQ has gone through this process. They've actually held classes saying, here's how you have to do this work. So, you know, working with a contractor that provides this service, that has people on staff that do specifically these things, from my perspective, is the right and efficient way to do it. The solution isn't to hire individuals to be on the payroll to do this kind of work. I think this is a responsible expenditure. Let me back up. I think it's an irresponsible expenditure of money because I think it's a poor process that we have to go through. But that process notwithstanding, I do not believe contracting with Wade Trim is irresponsible.
So this isn't something, Dave, that we could get the legislature to sort of get rid of. It comes down from the EPA. You know, sometimes you have items that have just been around for a long time, right? And when you go look at them, you can go to legislators and say, hey, you know, we have this burden. Why do we have it? There's really no rhyme or reason to this report. And you get somebody to
I can promise
run
you,
it
if
up
our
the
state
flagpole.
representative could get rid of this, he would have
Oh,
already.
right.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Based
Well,
on the
do
way
you know
he
what I
handled it
mean?
in the past.
Right?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
this
If you
is,
can convince 535 people in Washington DC to get rid of it, you're in good
Well,
shape.
well, maybe it's a executive order.
Yeah. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we've got a motion by Mr. Brada with support by Mr. Tominello to authorize Wade Trim to prepare the application for an MS4 general permit with MDEQ at a cost of $6,900. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Board.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is item D3. It was previously listed as item D1 regarding the Department Secretary position at Fire Station 2. Board members, we have interviewed several candidates for the Department Secretary position at Fire Station 2. The candidate that was proposed at the March 23rd, 2015 regular board meeting and approved at the April 13th, 2015 regular board meeting has accepted an offer to remain with her current employer. We had several good candidates throughout the interviewing process. The recommendation is based on interviews as well as background and reference checks. We have chosen or are proposing Ms. Sharon Vogt as the recommended hire for the position at a cost of $18.20 per hour plus benefits. I don't know if there's a motion at this time or there's discussion.
Discussion.
All right.
So really, there's two items here. The first item, you know, we have a fire budget. We brought this up at the last meeting. And so I won't go into all of it again. I don't know anywhere, any manager, anywhere in private industry that would run a budget deficit for 4 years to the tune of about $500,000 a year, then come into the final year where you have really no money on your tree. We're still running a budget deficit, and instead of fixing that budget, getting it on track, because structurally it needs to be fixed. What are we going to do? We're going to go and make that worse by hiring somebody. Right now, once again, you have nobody in that position. The person retired. I think that you fix the budget and then you hire the person. And I discussed this with the chief today. I have no problem hiring a person, whoever that might be, just a generic person, if we had our budget in control. But government, and this doesn't happen in private industry, in government, we tend to say, we'll just go ahead and do this, and we know we have these problems over here, but we'll get this, but we really won't address these problems until much later. And we know we're not gonna do that because we did, the board did a committee last time. But that being said, once again, you have two options at the end of the day. You either control your costs or you raise revenue. So at the end of the day, you really only have one option. Or lay firemen off or raise the millage somewhere around 1 mil, 1.2, 1.3 at the end of the day. I don't think there's anything wrong. Fix your budget, bring this back, and hire a person. And I'll leave that alone. And I don't know how you go to the citizens at some point and say you want a millage increase, and anybody watching this would say, why are you hiring somebody? Because like I said, it's very hard, once you put somebody in that seat, to actually lay them off. I know that the board disagreed with that statement last time, but I know for me, I'm not hiring somebody just to lay them off, and laying people off is, you know, you don't like to do it as a manager ever. And that's why when people are, you know, when the firemen all retire in a couple years, you know, we'll probably be looking at that a little closer than probably doing something different than what we're doing today. The second item on this, I have a question regarding who is we? When this was done, it says, we have interviewed several candidates and we are making a recommendation. We have chosen Sharon Voigt as the recommended hire for the position. Who are we referring to in this as we? Mr. Verkest.
Sure, I'll answer that. You, Adam, and myself, along with Chief Lopez, went through the interview process. Well, I shouldn't say most, but several of the candidates that we interviewed for this position were also interviewed at a prior round when we had to hire someone in the clerical position for the Water and Sewer Department. I think it was last July or August. Back last year when we went through this, we narrowed the field down to several candidates that we thought were worthy candidates, and then we looked toward the department head to ultimately make a decision based on a pool of candidates that we felt collectively as a group were worthwhile candidates. We followed the same process this year, or for this position. We went through, and as I recall, we had several conversations where we talked about a pool of 3 candidates that we thought were worthwhile. We collectively talked to the chief. Chief came back and said that Ms. Brown was his choice, and we'd agreed with it. We brought it before the board, extended the position to her. Her current employer spoke very highly of her during the references, and ultimately, because of that presumably good reference, they decided to make her an offer, made it worthwhile for her to stay with her current employer. So we had really then 2 other candidates, or the option, a third option, which would be to go outside and pursue other candidates, go through the whole interview process again. I had a conversation with the chief, I had a conversation with Adam. When we had that conversation, you were not in. Adam and the chief both saw between the 2 candidates that we had, they were good choices. We discussed that we really didn't want to go through the interview process again and didn't feel like we needed to. Furthermore, because these positions come with a 90 working day probationary period, we've got about 5 months. So while we might try to narrow down our choice best we can, when all is said and done, the only real true way, you know, a couple of 45-minute interviews don't tell you as much as someone showing up day in and day out for as many as 5 months.
Chief, did you pick a candidate? Did you select a candidate that you thought was the best person for the position? I'm not really up to a lot of the interviewing process because I know that there was a committee developed to do
Yeah,
this.
the committee did.
Yeah, I was involved in that process along
Okay.
with the supervisor, the treasurer, and the clerk.
Was there a particular person that you selected that you wanted for the position? You felt
Originally,
was best? I mean, originally now?
correct, that was the name that we brought forward at the previous board meeting, yes,
Okay, and that's the person that's not available now?
correct.
Okay.
She's chosen to stay with her current employer and not
Was-
accept this position.
Was this person your second choice?
There was a 2 or 3 candidates who we felt were capable of doing the position,
Okay.
but they didn't quite reach the level of the first candidate. So when that candidate declined the position, there was a pool of 2 or 3 that we felt had strong resumes, interviewed very strong, and were suitable. And discussion ensued amongst those resumes and candidates, which would be the best to fill the position.
And that's how we arrived at this one.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, so that being said, this brings me to what I've alluded to on this board, but this is a great example. I never have an example when this comes up. We have a committee, and it's been like this, Ken, Adam, I, and the chief, because in this case it was this. And we go through the interviews, and everybody agreed. We got down to 2 or 3 people. This was the last meeting I had, not right now, but when we brought the last name forward, the committee as a whole decided this person was the best committee. This person was the best for that position. Then we get to hear, and I think everybody heard, that we was not the whole committee. We excluded me. There was no, hey, Darren, are you available? Can you meet us at this time? We'd like to get together. As a matter of fact, I didn't even know the person, what was her name? I can't remember the young lady's name that turned down the job. I knew nothing that she turned down the job until I read the board packet. You know, I would think a reasonable person, I know I would have done this, once that person said that they would not taking the position, I would have called everybody or sent an email and got everybody together and said, we need to rethink this and we need to sit down and talk about it. We're all part of this committee. You know, I don't appreciate getting excluded. That's not the process. And more importantly, this particular person wasn't even in the top 3 when we were bringing the other person forward. This person was not mentioned. This person was off to the side. We had already dismissed this particular candidate within the committee.
Who's we?
Well, the chief, you, I, and Adam.
That's
I
incorrect.
strongly disagree with that.
I would not.
I understand that.
I would not.
And with all due respect,
her
I
name is
just
Mr.
approve.
Verkest, do
Hold
I
on.
have the floor or
No,
do you?
you don't. You don't,
Mr.
because you've had the
Verkest,
floor
do
for about 20 minutes.
You know what? Excuse me, Mr. Verkest. I think that the people in the audience would say that allow me to speak.
No, they
We
wouldn't,
sit here-
because
we
you're
sit
going to
here-
say the same thing. What you're...
I-
Hold on a minute.
Mr. Verkest, I will not allow you.
Hold on a minute.
Mr. Verkest, excuse me.
Hold on a
I
minute.
sit here and the board sits here and allows you to speak as long as you want. And I sit patiently, and if you speak for half an hour or 45 minutes or even an hour,
Nobody
all
here
sit here
speaks for an
patiently.
hour. Nobody here speaks for an hour.
But
the
but
point
that
is before we interviewed any of these candidates, you sent an email to every member of the committee, and then further to every board member here, to every trustee, saying, I already knew who the candidate was going to be. So I don't appreciate your decision of taking one of
Would
those
you like me to
candidates.
read the email?
Hold on.
I'll read the email.
Hold
to
on,
the citizens.
hold on.
Let's read the email.
I understand, and give me an opportunity to speak. I don't appreciate the fact that going into this process, you made a statement to everybody who it was going to be and why it was going to be. So what value is it when, before we talked to any one of these candidates, you'd already said what was going to occur? You
Correct.
already predicted it, so why would I call you? You knew, you called it back in February.
But
What's the
she-
sense of calling you for your approval?
But-
You said, let's just get it over with. So what are you going to do at that point? Hold on a minute. What are you going to do at that point? Say now you've changed your mind and you disagree with your advice from February? Because back in February you said, let's just choose this candidate and get it over with. What's the sense of calling you to say, do you want to hire this person? You've already put it in writing. That's why. And aside from that, the fact that you weren't in and there was no opportunity to have that conversation with you.
Well, there was no phone call, no email, no nothing. If I go down to your office and you're not in for whatever reason, doesn't matter. You know, I just don't move on with something and say, oh, you're not here, so we'll just make a decision and talk. I don't think that was this kind of decision. Sure. I think that there's plenty of time where we could have got together as a group and discussed it. But I don't remember her being in the last 3. I remember Paula and Misty and the other young lady.
Misty was never in the final 3.
Those were the people that we were talking about. So
Adam,
if you
did
if
you
you
see
want
Misty in the final 3?
if you want we can change history. But I will read my email.
Please do.
On February 25th, Andrew Dimchek, sent an email and said, attached are the resumes of the candidates for Department Secretary position. Some of the candidates were finalists last time. The township hired a clerical position. Names look familiar. The resumes attached are from June of last year. I've asked each individual to bring an updated copy of their resume, blah, blah, blah. I sent back a very sarcastic, tongue-in-cheek, well, sarcastic, some people might not think that, I sent an email to Andrew, Mr. Verkes, Mr. Witt, and Mr. Lopez. I said, this was before the interviews, much like I said when we were appointing the supervisor, same statement. Why have interviews when you are going to hire Jack's daughter for political payback? Save everybody the time. That was the email I sent. And the person that we brought, that is being brought forward, is Mr. Swiatkowski's daughter.
Who was born and raised in an environment of a firefighter.
And much like we were doing the supervisor thing, we all knew that Ken was going to be the supervisor that night. So instead of waiting for everybody to go through the process for 4 hours and waste the citizens' time, just go ahead and do it. That's what that was meant. If that's what you're going to do, which we know that's what you're going to do, because Jack is your friend, Jack is the board's friend, he sat on this board, that's what I said.
So
It's
would you
very
say
simple.
that this
It's
ruse
very
was
simple.
so elaborate that
I
we
didn't-
went through an hour and a half agenda item last meeting
And the meeting before.
and the meeting before
Tabled it.
to put somebody else forward? No, let me finish. To put somebody else forward to have them get another job offer that would pay them more, also we could hire Jack's daughter. Is that what you're saying?
That is not what I said, Adam.
Well,
It
that's
sounded
what
like what you were
that's
saying.
what
I want to
I
make
did.
sure I understand your allegation. So I'm going to give
I
you some
didn't make
rope.
an allegation.
Go ahead.
All I'm saying is that we can't find somebody out of the 40 candidates. When we hired Mrs.
We
Mrs.
did.
Just
We
wait.
did.
When
We
hired-
did.
We did. When we hired the gal in the water sewer department, you know, I've always been against, and my position has never changed. Friends of board members, you know, I don't give that equal weight. But when we hired the lady, she was so far ahead of everybody else we interviewed that there was no other choice but that person. In this case, the candidate, while she can do the job, there's several other candidates. If you look, it's just sort of in the middle. There's nothing great and there's nothing not great, right? There's nothing that would bring that candidate up to the top, other than the fact that she is a former trustee's daughter. And I don't think, if that's not the case, I don't think that the decision would be made to have her as the candidate. I know that wouldn't be the case. But can she do the job? Yeah, I'm not saying that she can't. But there are several other people that you would put, if you were an independent person and didn't know anybody, you would put probably her with 4 or 5 other people, not knowing. who
No, I
they are.
gotta say this.
That's fine.
You have a deputy, Ryan.
Yep,
I really like that guy. He's a great guy.
nice guy.
He did an awesome job. You selected a great guy for your deputy. Did you know him before you hired him?
I knew.
Yes.
Well, no, what I said
And
was.
he's turned out to be an awesome asset to your department.
Well, I was having that discussion with the chief today, and I brought that very point up. I knew Ryan from playing hockey with Ryan.
He's a great guy.
So I knew Ryan from the hockey rink and in that environment and that way. I was not per se.
You were
friends-
probably his friend or an acquaintance.
I don't know if you'd call friend, you know, you don't call somebody up every day, or I wouldn't go out to dinner with the gentleman. Once hockey season ended, I wouldn't see him, you know, his boys were a little older than mine, maybe the next year, right? So,
Right.
so that being said, there's a difference when you have we had several family members of current employees. We dismissed them outright, pretty much. Without getting into too much detail, I don't want to get into too much detail, but they were pretty much dismissed for this same reason. So I was quite surprised when I saw this.
I'm just going to
because
disagree
of
with
the-
that statement. They were just
Likewise.
people were chosen based on skill. People were cut from a list based on skill. There wasn't like, hey, you know so and so, you're off the list. Maybe that's how you make your decisions in life. That's not how the committee as a whole acted. So to make those
I disagree.
allegations are wrong. That's you're speaking for
dis-
yourself.
I
Right.
disagree. Adam.
But that's the whole point, Mr. York. At the basis of this, your perception on all of this and my perception or Mr. Witt's perception, we disagree.
And that's
It's
fine.
simply stated.
And that's fine.
And my
I
point
accept
was,
that.
you probably could have interviewed 40 more people for Ryan's job. And you may or may not have found a better candidate, but you hired him based on your gut. Your gut was, I think this guy is gonna work out well with this team of people. I think he's gonna be cooperative, I think he's gonna be professional, and I think he'll do a good job. And he has.
Do you know
But you
why I
hired
hired
him
Ryan?
from his gut, from
Do
your gut, you
no,
hired him.
No, I'll tell you why I hired Ryan if you really want to know about it. I knew that I could teach him the skill set, just like this job at the fire department. I could teach the skill set because I don't know that necessarily Ryan had the skill set at the time. But what I did hire Ryan for was his attitude, because
Right.
I had some other problems with a previous employee that I didn't want to deal with anymore.
Exactly. And I think that maybe that's one of the things the chief was thinking, is that
Now,
this person got a great attitude and is probably pretty professional,
yep.
based on the interview.
Now, when we had to hire someone in the assessing department, oh gosh, I don't remember exactly how long ago it was, but it was when we hired Mr. Demchik. We went through an interview process with several candidates, and when we were done, we narrowed that down to a pool. And since Mrs. Ryan is our assessor and she runs the assessing department, we then looked to her as a department head and said, who would you be comfortable with in that department? And she said, well, I would like Andrew. And so we made that decision. When we got to the accounting department, as I recall it, we actually made a decision at that point, if I'm not mistaken. I know Mrs. Jorgensen felt strong, but I'm not sure if that one was her call or if that was because we already had a temporary employee. When we got to the water and sewer position, we'd interviewed several candidates. There was one of them that most of us didn't interview because she had travel planned for the summertime. And when we were done with the interview process, we went to Mr. Axtell and we said, "Who out of all of those, who would you like?" We had some, folks we thought were better than others. Mr. Axtell said, "Well, I like Mr. Bobseen. I'm sorry, Mrs. Bobseen, but I really like everyone to have a chance to interview her before the board makes that decision, because the committee didn't have a chance to meet and speak with her." Now, as a matter of fact,
I think I just said all that.
her
That's
husband.
exactly what I said.
Her husband does work for the township, and he's a respected employee. It didn't preclude her employment, but it was something that we had to consider. But the common thread here is when we did this, we went to the department head and said, "Who is it that you would like?" Now, where we might disagree, when we were done with the interview process, I distinctly remember saying that Miss Vout, Miss Brown, who we'd originally recommended, and I think it was Mrs. Phyllis.
Jane. Wasn't Jane one of them too?
No. Mrs. Phyllis were the three candidates that we liked the best. Collectively, we said, "What do you think, Chief?" The chief said, "Out of those three, I really feel strongest about Miss Brown." As a result, we brought that recommendation back over 2 meetings and discussed it. And once we made that decision, we extended that offer to the employee, and no surprise, based on the recommendation, her current employer said we'd like to keep her. That narrowed the pool down to 2, and the chief even introduced a third interviewee in that discussion based on a recommendation that he'd received. I had a lengthy conversation with the chief. When we were done with that conversation, the chief had indicated to me that he liked Miss Vogt. It was a Friday, and I said, "Well, before I put it on the agenda Monday, I'm going to call you Monday. You sleep on it. In the meantime, I'll see if she's still available." I called her to see if she was still available so that we wouldn't extend the offer to yet another person that might have found employment elsewhere. She said, I am still available. I said, "Well, I can't really tell you, but I want to just narrow it down." Monday, I called the chief, said, "What do you want to do?" Chief said, I'm good with her. We discussed the other two candidates in detail based on what we perceive to be strengths and weaknesses. And we did definitely have a discussion saying that we thought there were three candidates that we all collectively felt comfortable could do this job and we felt could do it well. When we got to that point, just like we did in the assessing department and in the water and sewer department and in several other departments, at least that I've been involved in, when we narrowed it down to a pool we were comfortable with, we ultimately then looked to the department head and said, you make that decision. So I think it's really, really important that we publicly state, did you and I have that conversation, Chief?
Yeah, I would say the summary you just gave of the process is accurate to my recollection.
And I didn't say I want one person, I don't want this person, I like that person. I think what we talked about was maybe say with candidate A, she may have strengths in this area, but she may not be as strong in this other area. But candidate B might have strengths in that area, but doesn't have strengths in the other area. And I distinctly remember saying to you, out of these individuals, I think both of them are good employees, or from what I can tell from a couple of interviews, but ultimately I don't have to spend most of my day every day with them. That's really a choice I think you should have the opportunity to make. You said this is the person I like, and that's what I brought forward. Now we can hash out, well, I agree with this, I disagree with that, and we could probably do it for hours.
Mr. Supervisor, just a question, and I'm sure it would not be being brought forth if the answer was yes, but in the hiring of Ms. Vaught, are we violating any township rules, regulations? Is there anything here that's, I'll ask Mr. Huth, I've heard what Mr. York has said, but is there anything in the township regulations that would preclude us because she's related to a former board member?
There is nothing.
Thank you.
If he was a board member, we do have an ordinance, or any of us,
Understood.
that are board members, whether trustee or whatever, elected officials.
Okay.
You're not allowed to have family members, and I believe that's extended out to aunts, uncles, maybe to cousins, not sure. I'd have to read it.
But to clarify, we're on solid ground, no issues about this particular candidate. Thank you.
But the point is, it doesn't pass the smell test sometimes.
Well, it
There-
doesn't pass
there-
your smell
there's
test.
there's a what it looks like to the public, and there are other candidates, and my guess would be that you know, Ken, sometimes you have a tendency to put words in people's mouth and drive them to where you want, and you know, I told the chief I wasn't gonna call him out tonight, and I'm not going to.
Good.
So I'm not gonna debate that conversation. I think it stands on its own, and if they're, you know, let the citizens decide if this is right or not. It's their decision.
Sounds fair. I think we've
Yeah.
talked this out pretty good. Is there a motion this evening on this item?
Mr. Supervisor, I'll make a motion to hire Ms. Sharon Vaught for the position of Department Secretary for the Fire Department at the contracted rate of $18.20 per hour with an annual salary of $37,847.72, subject to the completion of a successful 90-day probationary period.
All right, there's a motion by Mr. Capral. Usually we say plus benefits. I mean, it is a contracted position, you know, or there is a contract that dictates those benefits, but are you okay with plus benefits?
Yes.
All right. There's a motion by Mr. Capral. Is there support?
Support.
All right. Support by Mr. Brado. Now, I know we've all had a pretty lengthy process of discussing this, and I certainly won't prevent any board member from speaking further, but if that's not the case, and nobody wants to speak any further, at least for now.
I mean, I just, you know, when we have a job, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier. My friends, and I see people all the time, do you have a job? I tell them, no, do not come here, because I don't want people to think that somebody got a job because I am the treasurer here. I've always kept that distance because it just doesn't look right.
Okay. If there's no other board comment, well, I'll open the floor for public comment.
Jim Sunstock, 31698 San Juan. First off, I'd like to address Mr. Brado. Deputy that's hired by a elected official does not follow the same rules as the others, okay? That person serves at that person's complete discretion. They can be out the next day. So I don't want to hear anything about, oh, you chose a friend or you didn't choose a friend. Mr. Verkest chose a friend of himself, too. So, now let's talk about the actual person you chose. Most people don't remember, but I do, when Mr. Verkest took over the job. At that time, there was 6 people up there. Tony had already left, and Mr. Verkest wanted to be supervisor. And guess who else wanted to be supervisor? Mr. Swayakowski. And in fact, he had 3 votes, and Ken had 3 votes. And then miraculously, all of a sudden, Mr. Swayakowski decided to back down. It don't pass the smell test at all. It stinks to high heaven. Could even be described as potentially political cronyism, political payback, there's a lot of terms, maybe even corruption. The fact of the matter is that this woman was not the best candidate. The fact of the matter is that she was chosen by Ken and with words in his mouth to be there as payback because Mr. Swayakowski let Ken become supervisor. And you know what? It stinks to high heaven. Stinks badly. And the citizens out there, I hope you're listening tonight and understand what's going on here. This is political cronyism at the best, or worst, however you want to define it. But it's bad. This lady don't belong there. The only reason she's been put in there as a political favor and political payback to Mr. Swayakowski for letting Mr. Verkest become supervisor. And if this board allows that stuff to happen, shame on you again. But you know what? I'm going to tell you right now, you're attaching your horse to Mr. Verkest's cart. Don't be surprised when every one of these things gets listed. Every one of them. They did this, they did this, they did this, they did this, they did this. And any one of them is bad enough to keep you from getting reelected again. Maybe you don't care to get reelected. I don't know. But I'll tell you what, this looks terrible. She does not deserve the job. She wasn't the best candidate. Her only claim to fame is she's related to Jack Swayakowski. Thank you.
Thank you.
William Bardell, 18-year resident. I thought we were going to try to save $60,000 and have a rover type secretary that a floater. This is a chance to save $60,000 and we can go with our recreation plan and buy that land next to the senior center and stop giving our seniors a kick in the pants and buy that land right there. It's on our recreation plan to buy that land off of Jefferson for the senior center and not kick our seniors in the pants. And why can't our firemen live in our our township? I mean, is Harrison Township not good enough for them? Can't they live in our township? Can't they do their own typing and their own term papers? They got to have a secretary for that. Got to have ambulances and diesels and refrigeration units on top. If you have them on the bottom, copper doesn't rust. Aluminum doesn't rust. You can have those pipes come on the bottom. As long as you have a rubber grommet going through the steel plate and you don't have electrolysis of metal. When you have two dissimilar metals, you have electrolysis. You have a rubber grommet. You can have those refrigeration units down low. You got, I mean, it goes on and on. It's endless. You got diesel trucks. I mean, it never ends. Someone needs to step up to the plate. Let's save 60 Gs. Let's buy that land for sale over by the senior center and quit kicking our seniors in the pants. And do something for this township. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill Serville, resident. First off, I agree that this person shouldn't be hired at all until you get the fire budget in order. It's something that you can get by. You've gotten by for at least a month without that person. Mr. Ferlini, I understand, thought that that was a half-time position, that he was gonna have a floater do that and something else. You haven't even considered that. I think that it also does not look above board. But the big issue here right now is you're trying to muddy the water by saying that there was an email sent. Tongue-in-cheek is what it was, and I kind of agree with it. But the fact of the matter is, you have a process, and you're supposed to follow your own process. You formed a committee, and you didn't include one of the full-time elected officials in the process of picking the second choice. You just went and did it on your own. Now, as far as Mr. Braudo I agree with Mr. Senstock. There's no comparison. This is going to be a union employee that might be here for 40 years. And Mr. Gowing is an at-will employee. Probably the day that our treasurer is no longer treasurer is the last day that Mr. Gowing will probably serve here also. Someone else will make their own choices. But you should follow your own process. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment, move back to board comment. One resident mentioned that I appointed a friend. I would disagree with that. I don't believe I knew Mr. Dimchek prior to, matter of fact, I think he came and worked for free at the township because he had graduated from Central Michigan University, tried out student teaching, and decided that he thought he would like to be involved in municipal government. So he said, I'll work for free. He literally came to the township, and we said, well, how do you turn it down? So we put him in the assessing department, and wasn't too long before the assessor said, wow, this fellow is really sharp. He's a good, hard-working individual. Although the truth is, I was pretty impressed with him, I actually tried to hire someone else first from the same community this other gal stayed with, and she also was given an opportunity. So, well, I certainly don't want to disparage Mr. Demchek. He was my second choice. But I had no relationship or friendship with him prior to the day that he called the township about 3 times and said, can I work for free to get experience? There was some discussion about the whole appointment of a person to fill Mr. Ferlini's role. I recall the story a little bit different because, as I recall it, there were 3 board members that were interested in that position. So I think there was a little bit more dynamics to it. But regardless, one of the residents pointed out that I haven't even considered not filling the position, and I have to take exception to that. We've had discussions not only amongst board members and amongst union leaders with the fire chief, looking for ways that we can fill that position. When we were done, based on what we saw as comparables and based on what we saw in the operations and our conversations with the chief, we made a decision that that position needed to be filled. I've been pretty firm in that. I brought it twice. The board said, hey, let's hold on a minute, let's think it through. At the last meeting, we'd made the decision to hire someone, and we extended an offer to who we thought was a good candidate. I believe we have another good candidate before us. This candidate was brought to us. I can't tell you what year it was, but there was an opening, and Mr. Swikowski sat on the board, and both he and his wife, in the way that I think a parent would do for their child, brought her forth and said, she's really a good candidate, and you guys should consider her. And at the time, we said, well, we've got a policy that prevents that, and we pointed that out. I think when we had the last round of hires, she was brought forward as a candidate. We had the discussion. We discussed who interviewed well. In the end, the department head said, you know, I'm more comfortable with this other person. I think the board, certainly know the board supported that, but we as a committee supported that. We also felt very strong, and In that case, our instincts were right that Mrs. Bobstein's proven to be a very good hire. We've gone through the same round again. I would disagree with Mr. York. I believe we talked about narrowing it down to 3 candidates. We chose the one of that candidate that we felt was the best, and
I
it
think
was
you
really
said
the
this already, but-
chief's choice.
You accuse me of that, but
After that, we had 2 people left. I said to the chief, I like either one. You make the choice. He made the choice. I put it on the agenda. That's what's before us now. But I understand. I wish you could see into my heart and know what I'm trying to tell you, but I
This is
understand
what-
that it can also appear some other way, and I respect residents' comments and their observations.
I think what frustrates me the most is the simple fact that nobody even bothered to call me to get together and as a committee meeting. And that is simply because you knew from our previous discussions in the committee that I would give you a fight for Sharon.
Okay?
I would be the nemesis against that because I was that throughout the whole process for 2 months. I think everybody knows that.
Correct.
And I think that you purposefully exclude me from those conversations because it's easy to, your department heads, they're just gonna, they respect the supervisor's position enough where they pretty much will go along with whatever you say. That's just the general, and it doesn't matter if it's Mr. Forlini or Candace Miller going back, they generally respect the position enough to go along with
There's
it.
probably some exceptions to that.
But generally,
Okay.
generally speaking.
Okay?
And I think that's where most of my frustration lies. Because I certainly, if given the opportunity, I certainly would have called everybody, whoever was on that committee, and said, we need to get together and rethink this, what we're doing. And whether or not people agree with me or disagree with me, that's the process. And I think it's just a complete lack of respect. And I think it shows up here on this board. And that's fine. That's part of the reason why I didn't want to be on the other committees. I guess I just tired of the lack of respect. You try and do the best job you can for the residents and watch out for their money and try and bring items up. But, if the board is a democracy, if people feel fine with this, maybe there's some political, maybe the residents look at this and say this is fine. Maybe they look at it and say it doesn't. I don't know. But I think that a full disclosure of who this person was necessary. And like I said, I don't dislike this person. I think she's a nice person. I'd even give her a reference for any other community. I just think that for this community, with her father being who he was, it's not appropriate.
So you wouldn't hire any friends or anything like that for any jobs?
I certainly would not ask anybody to hire my son or daughter for a position in this community.
Well, you
After,
couldn't.
after I left, I would not have anybody entertain my son or daughter being an employee of this community because I just don't feel that's appropriate.
Okay.
Now, if somebody in Clinton Township or Huntington Woods or wherever wanted to interview them, that would be a whole nother story.
Gotcha. Well, we've had a fair amount of discussion. Is there anything new that any board member might like to share? Hearing none, we've got a motion by Mr. Capro with
I think
support.
the chief wanted to add
Oh, I'm
something.
sorry, I didn't see it, Chief.
Oh, I'm sorry, if I could just add one last comment that I just would like to make, because an issue was brought up about the senior citizens, and I do believe that it's very important that the seniors have a good facility, but I can't say strongly enough that the greatest asset our senior citizens have are the 25 licensed paramedics on this fire department that are out helping them every single day, saving their lives and helping them off the floor when they fall. And that's the greatest asset that our seniors have in this community. And I as fire chief, I think it's important that the board hear that.
I agree.
And
Thank you,
I
Chief.
do have one more thing to add. we have gone a month without a person in this role, but building is also down almost 40%. Right? So maybe we do need somebody harder than we, more than we think in that role.
Okay,
You know, just for the record, the board, if you remember, when I went a year and a half without somebody, you know, it certainly can be done. Maybe that's why I have no empathy for somebody just having to go a month.
Yep.
I
What's
went
a year and a half?
I went a year and a half with one staff member, myself and Jared Maynard, collecting 60,000 bills.
No, that was a matter of a couple of months.
Oh, no, it wasn't. It was.
Once again, we disagree.
Oh, I
We certainly
disagree.
are.
It was.
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. Capper with support by Mr. Brado to hire Ms. Sharon Vogt for the position of Department Secretary for the Fire Department at the contract rate of $18.20 per hour, an annual salary of $37,847.72, plus benefits, subject to the completion of a successful 90-day probationary period. All those in favor?
Roll call, please.
Okay. In the future, if you'd like a roll call, you can always
Well,
let
I
me know.
didn't want to interrupt you, so I let you finish.
Okay. All right, Mr. Witt?
Mr. Capro,
Yes.
Mr. Brado,
Yes.
Mr. Batante.
Yes.
Mr. Tominello,
Yes.
Mr. York,
No.
Mr. Witt, yes, Mr. Verkast.
Yes. Thank you, Board. Next on the agenda is item D4. It was previously listed as item D2. Board members, our Deputy Supervisor, Andrew Dimchik, is, working on his master's degree in public administration. And as a part of that, he's looking for a scholarship from the the Michigan Townships Association, the Robert R. Robinson Memorial Scholarship. It's meant to help pay for school for students enrolled in a Michigan university pursuing a public administration degree. He's going to Oakland University, and we have before us a resolution whereby if we approve it, it'll help him in his application for a scholarship. It happened to be several years ago, Mr. Witt was in the same role. He did apply and receive the scholarship, and it assists a young man in furthering his education. So I would encourage the board to adopt the resolution as presented.
Are you a junior?
No, I just started the program.
I
The
was
master's
reading,
program.
wasn't I reading it? Oh, all right. Motion to adopt the resolution, do you have to present it?
Yeah, is that your motion?
Yes.
To adopt the resolution?
As presented.
Mr. Tominello, with support by Mr. York. Discussion, board members.
I was reading the MTA magazine and it had this in there and it said you had to be a junior or senior. And I'm like, Andrew's not a junior or senior. That's fine, you can do it as a master's program, is that what it is?
It's junior, senior, or graduate
Okay.
student.
I don't think they had graduate student in the little book.
It says it on in the packet.
Oh,
All right, further discussion, board? Hearing none, we'll open up the floor for public comment. Nope. And now we'll close the floor for public comment.
Mr. Tominello,
Yep.
yes.
Mr. York,
Yes.
Mr. Batante,
Yes.
Mr. Brado,
Yes.
Mr. Capro,
Yes.
Mr. Witt, yes, Mr. Verkast.
Yes. Resolution adopted. Thank you, board. Thank you. And thank you. Next on our agenda is public comments. They could be about any topic for a 5-minute duration.
Thank you. William Bardell, 18-year resident. I want to say all the deputies are very polite, very professional. And Ken, your deputy is very patient with me, and all your deputies are very patient with me, and I appreciate that. What I want to say is, we talked about, I know I was, about 4 or 5 years ago, I called the township because the Freedom Trail archway wasn't there anymore, and I called the township, this is maybe 5 years ago. And I don't know who I spoke to, and I said, you know, the Freedom Trail arch is not there anymore. And coming back home after a long day from Trenton or downriver, getting off the expressway, and you'd see the bicyclers and you see that arch, and you had the illusion that the it was an archway, and you had the illusion that the bicyclers were going into a forest or something, just the illusion. Well, the lady at the township, this is about 5 years ago, told me that somebody ran into it. So I'm on the phone and I'm waiting but it's going to be repaired. They're going to put a new 4x4 in there. They're going to call 8811. They're going to auger the hole. They're going to put 21 AA in, set the post. They're going to level it. They're going to put it in. Boom, boom, boom. It's going to be done. Fast forward 5 years later, still not there. I'm wondering if this falls under the same criteria as that swing set that was donated to the park by Mr. Tominello's neighborhood. A gentleman came in and was wondering what happened to that swing set to their little family park out there that was sitting in a corner of some warehouse somewhere and not installed. The legs were cut too short, and I'm just wondering, nobody on God's green earth could extend those legs or put that playground equipment in. I'm just wondering, why do we pay these people? Who pays these people, and what are we paying them for? The second thing I want to talk about real quick is I looked at our recreation plan for 2012 to 2017, and it talks about the Tucker Park expansion. And it says the acquisition of that land that abuts Jefferson and Tucker Street, I believe it's Tucker Street, where the senior center is, that was going to be Ballard, thank you. That was going to be Ballard, that land was going to be purchased, and we were going to use that for more high visibility to the senior center to maybe get some rich people coming in from Traverse City to come and shoe their horse over here in Harrison Township and be here in Harrison Township. And that's the 2012 to 2017 recreation plan on page 48. The other thing I'm looking at the recreation plan from 2012 to 2017 existing park locations where everyone agreed to put that cell tower that this Schlick Willie from AT&T is tying our hands behind our back on so many levels. He wants a 60 by 60 area in a virgin woods and a virgin wetland where I see this is a township park location. And also the proposed wetlands. I'm wondering, since we got this downtown authority, are we going to be a one-trick pony? I mean, I like to eat and I like to have a couple beers, but I also like nature. Again, are we going to kick the seniors in the pants and not give them an expanded park, maybe have some putt-putt out there for them? You know, we have an aging population. Are we going to do something with that? Because it's in our plan, and it's for sale. We should be picking that up. So are we going to be a one-trick pony and just have the downtown authority with the restaurants? Like I said, again, I like to eat. I'm a foodie. I like to drink a couple beers, but I also like the bike path. I like nature. Are we going to pillage this land? This guy wants a 60 by 60. You can go 40 by 40. We can't tie off. We can't put an antenna on there. If Mr. York wants to pump it up and pump up the cable vision, we can't do that. If Mr. Axtell wants to put some electronics in there. So we got our hands tied behind our back for $1,500 a month. And so what I'm wondering is, are we going to be a one-trick pony and be like Sterling Heights and Warren and forget about recreation? Because a lot of people moved out here for this recreation. I could have moved to West Bloomfield. I could have moved anywhere. It's the parks. It's all this stuff that brings the people in here. The other thing I want to say is make sure everyone get out and vote May 5th and vote, please vote no on Mr. Snyder's money grab. That is a 17% increase in the sales tax. It's 1 cent, but it's going to cost every man and woman $600 a year, provided you do not buy a refrigerator or a car. So the Nerd Squad charge you more for your fishing license. You got to get all species. He's sticking it to you, and what you see on TV, all the money on the gas tax. Yeah, sure, that's going to go on the roads, but they didn't say anything about the sales tax. So it's a bait and switch. Another hand in the cookie jar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill Serville, resident. I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but I'm gonna come back onto this, recycling program from, what's the name of this company? Simple Recycling. On page 3, it says, section 6 says, set out procedures. Residents shall place soft recyclables into containers, place containers at the curbside for collection. Now, they infer elsewhere in here that they will supply, they are gonna buy some containers. It doesn't say that they're gonna provide these to residents or they're not, but that's the implication. But it also says overflow material shall be placed adjacent to the containers in plastic bags or other easily handled container. Soft recyclables shall not be set out in tied bundles. Contractor must collect all recyclables that are set out in this manner and placed within 7 feet of the curbside. Now, if you jump down to number 7, it says ownership. Soft recyclables set out for collection on a regularly scheduled collection day shall belong to the contractor from the time it's set out. That means anything within the edge of the road and 7 feet out, theoretically, belongs to them, including the recyclable bin that has metal in it that might be valuable. And whether or not we get anything from Rezo or not, if he gets money for it, that's offsets the cost he has to charge us. It's a good thing. So don't say it's free money. It's taking money out of the left hand and putting it in the right hand. But there is an obligation on the township's part. Number 12, it says publication, information, and education program. The township shall plan and coordinate a public education and information program to inform service recipients of this recycling program. I won't read the rest, but what it's saying is we've got to spend our efforts to boost this guy's collection time, make more money for this private company. I think you made a mistake going with this, and I think it's going to come back to haunt you. I'm going to have my camera ready when I see these people picking stuff out of the recycle bin and putting it in their truck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Senstock, 31698, San Juan. The fire department secretary, I've said it many, many times. I didn't say it this time because I figured you were going to go ahead and do it anyhow, but you had a second chance. You had a second chance to think that through and finally show some business sense. You failed as a board, with one exception. The problem I have with the person that you picked is not because I know her or don't know her or whatever. I have a problem. She's related to Jack Swikowski, and Jack Swikowski was the deciding vote that gave you your supervisor. Additionally, you weren't intending on telling anything about that until it was brought up by somebody else. So you were going to sneak that through. I have a real problem with that. It's just rank. Another question I have is the fire department committee that you talked about at such great length at the last meeting. What's going on with that? Did you decide on how many members? When are you planning on bringing it back? And I'll take this opportunity right now to tell you I'd like to know the procedure because I'm going to volunteer for that committee. It's time that we get somebody on these committees that are supposedly for political cover that's going to ask the hard questions. And you might not like what I have to say. You may not like the way I even say it. But you know what? I will ask. And I am volunteering to be on that committee to provide a citizen's voice on that committee. Somebody that will actually stand up and say something, not one of your hand-picked political cronies. Another item that I'd like to discuss tonight is we've got the garbage pickup coming up very shortly. May 1st, I believe it was. May 2nd, okay, that's great. I'd like to see something sent out to the residents. Is there intent to send out some information about the garbage pickup? For instance, are you going to use the same schedule that you currently got, the same day of the week? All of that stuff. There was suggestions made that they were going to offer cans to people who ask, but they're not telling that to anybody. They were going to offer recycling containers to people that wanted them. 20-gallon ones, I believe it was. Nothing's been said. It's getting pretty damn late in the time schedule here to be putting that out. So I already hope that you've already got that in the wind. But we'll see. Lastly, and geez, I might even fall short. I don't know. But lastly, I'd like to suggest to people that don't be fooled by this proposal 1. It is a money grab. It's definitely not in your best interest. It's going to cost us lots and lots of money individually. And these are the same people 2 years from now or 3 years from now are going to get up there and say, oh, well, now we need to go from 7 to 8 cents. They won't put their they won't put their financial house in order, but they're going to keep coming to you for more and more and more money. And, oh, we don't have a plan. Whose fault is that? Was that my fault? No, that was deliberately done by these people to basically try to stuff you between a rock and a hard place. So tell them what? Tell them this. You're not going to do that. You go back and get your plan B. One last thing, and this has been a problem or a concern of mine several times, and I've voiced it. I watched this interaction tonight on the board, and you know, between the supervisor and the treasurer, and some of the things that were said, some of the things that were voiced many times, mostly by the supervisor. I believe at one time I referred to Mr. Verkest as presenting a filibuster for some of his items. He does that constantly. You know what? Now I'm going to talk right now, and you're going to have the ability to respond, and if you want to slam dunk me, you can. But understand this, I don't forget. And I'll be back at the next meeting to disregard or argue with anything that you say that's not proper, Mr. Verkest. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment. Move back to board comment. I'll do my best to satisfy the residents' request to make sure that I respond to all of the issues. Specific to Proposal 1, I really don't think this body has any business recommending what people do in the ballot box. I think the only thing I would recommend that people do is educate yourself, same as any election. Make sure that you're informed. The Freedom Trail Archway, I'm certainly willing to look into that and see what's involved in possibly getting that back out there. An update on the playground equipment. What had happened was the contractor who was doing the work to the child care facility took it upon themselves to cut off all of the equipment at the ground. So all of the pipes were cut off at ground level, even though typically those pipes go several feet into the ground. It doesn't prevent us from being able to repurpose that playground equipment, but it does make some additional work because there's a need to now weld extensions to all of that equipment. The original individual that quoted on the work and was the low quoter said, look, at this point there's no way I could honor that bid, but he was substantially lower than any other bidder, and he's certainly a noted member of the community. She was, I think there's been times when he's done work for free. I know he repaired the return box, the strong box for the library, did some welding on that. I think there's little question he's a reputable guy. I'd ask him to take another look at that. And yeah, he said he may be able to partner with a family member to be able to provide that work of extending those poles and reinstalling the equipment. Regarding the property at Ballard and Jefferson, and regarding the senior center itself, well, first of all, we do have frontage on Jefferson, but there is an outlot there that's right at the corner. It's currently commercially owned or privately owned, and it is for sale. There's nothing wrong with us taking a look at that. It's important to realize, however, that our recreation master plan doesn't require that we acquire it, but amongst several things, it suggests that we could acquire it. I think it's important to understand that when we write a document, and when other municipalities write a document like the master plan for recreation, it's really a basis for applying for a grant. So generally speaking, the people that we contract with to produce those documents try to think of all the possible ways that we might want to apply for a grant or might want to expand something. So the master plan for recreation does outline that we should look to acquire that property. If we were to acquire that, it would have no impact on the existing senior center. We do have CDBG funds, and we have our engineer working on a proposal within the scope of the funds that we have to propose the expansion of the senior center. That would give more meeting space, possibly exercise space, improved restroom facilities for the seniors, but it's hundreds of feet from Jefferson. But certainly we can take a look to see if there's any validity in the township purchasing that property. Regarding the cell tower is not in virgin woods. Those are not virgin woods. That land was farmed in the 20th century. There's one old tree there, but the vast majority of those trees, some of them I'm sure are younger than us. And it's certainly a gem. It's a beautiful piece of land. What we've tried to do is position that cell tower as much out of the way and off into the corner so to have as minimal as impact as possible to that public land, so that we do leave the opportunity open for access to that land. And as we discussed, it is certainly feasible that if the plan goes forward, we may be able to use the money that's generated from that cell tower to put back into that property to make public access a reality to that land through wooded trails and so forth. There was some discussion about the recycling program, about Section 6 and Section 7, about ownership of everything in 7 feet. We did have discussion with the contractor regarding that because one of the questions that wasn't asked here, but one of the questions that I asked is, if I were, I guess for lack of a better word, a junk collector, or some folks use the old term sheenie, I would love the notion that every day all the folks in the township put out nice green bags, and as long as I get out by 4 or 5 in the morning, I can have everything I want. So I'd ask that question of the contractor, how do you prevent that? So first of all, the language in the contract is there to allow them to enforce a charge of theft against someone who might literally cherry pick all of the items that are put out on a trash day. And what he'd explained is that it's rare, but in some instances they've actually tracked the items, they pursue the individual, threaten them with the thought of prosecution, and 9 times out of 10 you're dealing with someone who was just looking to make a quick buck. I mean, the majority of those bags aren't worth thousands, they're worth a couple of bucks. And that's the method that they've used. So that clause, as it was explained to me, is to say that once you put it in a green bag and you tag it and you clearly identify it for their purposes, they own it, and a third party can't come along and cherry pick it. But there's absolutely no conflict between our contract with our single waste hauler and their recycling responsibilities and the soft recycling. Number 12 was also a great catch, and I know the contract as we put it before you is basically the boilerplate, but Mr. Huth is aware of the fact that I'd asked him about number 12, and I also asked Mr. Brady, and the proposed contract that we gave to him for his approval said, I'm striking all that language in number 12, where it says the township shall engage in an advertising program. The revised language simply said that we'll assist in any way by posting on our website or by, if at a board meeting we announce it. We certainly want to promote the recycling program, but will incur no expense to do so. But number 12 does make that reference, and it was one of the sections that was struck from the contract. Regarding the relationship that Ms. Vout has with a former board member, I certainly disagree and take exception to the resident's accusation that I didn't intend to tell anyone. I think I had that conversation with several board members, but in addition, before I had a chance to, I was fortunate enough to have Mr. York make that clear to everyone, and I certainly am comfortable with that. On the crazy outside chance that Mr. York wouldn't have jumped right in and said it, I would have been happy to let that be known. And as I say, I did certainly share that with board members. And I'm pretty sure everybody knew it since Mr. York had made it clear from his email exchanges to every board member anyways. The fire committee, what's happening? Great question. Well, first of all, I've had correspondence with the fire department. They've asked if they can name someone to serve on that board, and I said I think that was reasonable. I don't think it's a choice we need to make. While I might like to have a resident serve, we do have firefighters that are residents. I also want to respect the fact that if we're going to have this discussion, I don't want to be seen as cherry picking the firefighter representative and trying to somehow steer that. I've had conversation with board members on who might serve. In addition, I've spoke to Chief Lopez. There are fire chiefs of other communities that are currently serving as fire chiefs in other communities in Macomb County who happen to live in Harrison Township. So I'd asked him through his professional association to see if they might be willing to serve. I followed up on some references with them, with other folks. Our former fire chief, Chief Seitz, is currently serving as a professor at Macomb Community College. Now, I did talk to him, and I'll tell this board that I'll tell this board what I'd said to him. I think that he is a respected fire chief, and as a professor, I think there's real value in that. I did say that I was concerned that the fact that he is a retiree of Harrison Township and receives a pension and health care from Harrison Township could appear to some to make him a biased reference. And I can understand that. So I'd asked him, he felt the same way. He also said that he has other family members in fire service. He also has an obligation to the college. So I said, in the exception of that, since I made it clear that I thought he would be an asset to the committee, I'd asked him, you know, does he have other people that he might recommend? So he gave me some references, and he also gave me a commitment that he would, you know, give it some thought. I'd asked if there might be either financial professors, or I don't know if I'd say financial, but you know, economic professors or accounting professors, someone that might have some budgeting experience. And also because he's still active in a faith community here in Harrison Township, he may have a professional relationship with someone that would be a good reference. Really, we're looking for residents that also have some professional gift to share or something to bring. Let's see, who else did I talk to? I reached out to SEMCOG back in 2011 or 2012, I don't remember, and I apologize. This board agreed to pursue a joint venture with Mount Clemens to see if there was a way that we could combine services with Mount Clemens. At the time, SEMCOG made 2 individuals available. Dave Berger is the department head of their collaborative team, and Ray Riggs is a retired assistant fire chief who works for SEMCOG that is specific to public safety. Dave said that they would both serve on that committee, but that ultimately he thought Ray would probably have more to share. Where Dave said he would contribute, he felt that Ray would probably over a long term spend more time on that committee. And I appreciate Mr. Senstock's offer to volunteer for the committee. So what's the next steps? We'll bring back before this board, likely on the next agenda, which was what I said it probably was going to take more than one meeting, a list of candidates, and it's ultimately up to this board to appoint those members. And I'm sure, as we do on many other agenda items, we'll have a healthy, spirited debate on who would be best served to serve on that committee. But ultimately, the decision is of this body of 7 on who might serve on that committee. There was a question asked about when the waste pickup begins. Well, actually, the technical end of the contract date is April 30th, but May 1st is a Friday. So the first thing I did is I reached out to Tringali Sanitation to confirm that they're not gonna stop on a Thursday of the collection date, and they agreed that they would collect May 1st, which was what we discussed when we had the pre-bid meeting, or the bid meeting with all the waste haulers. So service begins May 4th. Last week, I believe it was, Rizzo Sanitation Rizzo Services sent to us a sample flyer, lots of information on that flyer, asked us if the information was complete, if there was something we needed added. The short answer to the question, they will, in the short term, follow the same collection schedule. What they're actually publishing is a newsletter, so it was labeled the Spring and Summer of 2015 newsletter. It has a lot of answers to the questions and a lot of the details of how they're going to implement the service and in what order the various things move forward. I hadn't thought about it at the time. I certainly know it's their intent to publish and print and mail those out to everyone. But again, waste collection is still the same as it was before, the day that you put things out, and come Monday, other than the fact that the trucks are a different color, we're hoping that the service will look the same. They're going to pick up the same time, same place, follow the same schedule.